watching CTN, Connecticut Network. Your state, your government, your network.
Yes, I mean, those are the two areas where we did not have a consensus agreement, and that the Democratic proposal is that we do expand the definition of assault weapons to go to the so-called one-factor definition rather than two, and also to ban large-capacity magazines with 10 rounds or more. That was on our proposal. It was not on the Republican list. But as we said in the meeting, there is a substantial degree of overlap on the other proposals. For instance, both Democrats and Republicans were broadly supportive of creating a weapons offender registry to target people who have been convicted of violent offenses and make sure they register with their local police department. A broad-based permitting statute to expand permitting to long guns as well as to pistols and revolvers. Controls on the sale of ammunition, because right now we virtually have no controls on ammunition. Somebody who has stolen a gun can now legally walk into a store and buy ammunition for the gun that he just stole. And so we need to deal with that. So on issues like that, there are broad-based agreement. Again, also the provision to bar somebody who has had a mental health involuntary commitment to make that 5 years rather than 5 years rather than 1 year in terms of for eligibility. So there are a significant number of areas where there was agreement, and of course a couple of significant areas where there was not.
Any reason why there are two lists if this is a bipartisan committee?
Because there were some proposals that obviously were not agreed to by both caucuses, and our process was to advance recommendations to the leadership group from this stage to give them a range of options to consider for inclusion in the ultimate bill.
Robert Crook from the Connecticut Sportsmen's Association says they're going to fight this and get people to show up at this public hearing.
Well, that's certainly their right, and people on the other side will also be energized as well. As I said, we have a high level of interest in the issues that are being considered in this task force and working group.
Do you believe any of these recommendations would prevent a future Sandy Hook?
I don't think you can ever talk about prevention, but I think in the aggregate they would make it less likely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate
Good.
it.
Okay. Good.
Now that are already in effect, and this would expand it? Or are you saying that whole concept is
No,
new?
suitability under current law is for a handgun permit to carry.
All right, so why not expand that, or why not apply it to other guns?
Well, suitability is not defined, number one. There's no definition for suitability.
The Democrats tried to do that.
Well, they may try to do that, yeah.
I mean, they did in their proposal.
I get that. And under the Constitution, both Connecticut's Constitution and under the federal Constitution, I don't think you'll find suitability in there anywhere in the right to own a gun.
Doesn't that go to the whole regulation of guns, though? I mean,
No, I think there has been significant court activity that has tried to define what ownership should be permitted and shouldn't be permitted. There are a list of felonies that I think nationally and both at the state level that jurisdictions have determined would be sufficient for you to lose your right to own a gun. But if you look at the suitability list, I would ask you which other amendment under the Constitution should we remove for knowing somebody who may not be eligible to own a gun.
As this moves forward, the strongest debate going to be the magazine clips and the definition of assault weapon?
I think at some level, yeah. I think so.
Why?
Now, well, I do believe that there has been an effort to make those two items kind of the signatures of whether someone's actually moved or hasn't moved. And for that reason, I do believe that there'll be much more conversation about those. I think there is a way to achieve everything for those who want to achieve some reduction either in ownership or future ownership of any or both. And I think that can be accomplished without jeopardizing what I think most of us got involved with this bipartisan task force for in the beginning, which was to come up with a very broad group of initiatives that could have a very positive effect on the greater population of Connecticut. And whether it's got my individual idea in it or not doesn't really matter to me, because I know there's a whole legislative process. I suspect it matters to somebody.
Are you concerned that there wasn't a consensus reached, as was expressed by a couple of the working group members.
This is a huge issue, not only in this state but in this country. And I couldn't imagine people coming to a consensus list that had as broad a group of ideas if you just stuck purely to consensus. We actually talked about ways to get there. You know, should it take one vote from each caucus member, and then would you need to have a certain number of votes to get there? And it begins to look like you tried to carve together some solution to reaching that word, consensus. And it just seems to me that there is not an idea on that list, whether it's ours or theirs, that is unworthy of conversation. And so the best way to continue the conversation and provide the public with an opportunity to communicate their position on something, in my view, was to come out at this point with this cooperative agreement that has some things that are different on theirs and different on ours.
And next week, you don't want to be wed to that calendar of next week's date, the 13th or the 15th.
Whether I'm wed to it or not, I don't think it's going to matter. I think there are other people that are wed to something. I was at the Department of Public Safety this morning, and they made it very clear that some of the initiatives they heard were being discussed would require very significant changes in their agency. And so, you know, the question is, even if we agreed, for instance, that universal background checks were important, every background check request in the state of Connecticut goes to the Department of Public Safety. It doesn't go to NICS, it goes to the Department of Public Safety. And so that requires more people. I think if we as a legislature and the governor believe that that's an important step for us to take, then we better figure out a way to get the money and put it in place. Otherwise, I think we're going to disenfranchise people, and I think we're going to only set ourselves up for failure. So dates. You know, I think there are some things within the agreement that you can achieve pretty quickly. I think you can increase penalties and change fines and change imprisonment schedules. Even those will have ramifications. I don't know to what degree. But it seems to me that any of the more significant changes, such as how do we check backgrounds, what do we do in terms of permits and that sort of thing, all those have ramifications, not only on DPS, but on retail establishments here in the state of Connecticut. I don't think our recommendation suggests, and I wouldn't want anyone to think that it does, that starting on the 14th of March, someone shouldn't be able to buy a box of ammunition without an eligibility certificate, because I think Democrat leadership knows there's no way to get there.
Is it hypocritical to say you can't buy weapon A here, but a manufacturer can make it in the state?
I have constituents that own just about any gun you can think of, and they fit just about every profession you can think of in life. And they suggest to me that the ownership of a gun shouldn't be restricted. That if you qualify under a federal background check and that you can afford the gun and you can handle it safely, that should be the requirement. They concede, and in some cases they've suggested that looking at the education component is a very valuable thing to do. I've had some gun retailers suggest to me that 18-year-old is a lot younger than 18 years old used to be 20 years ago. And so for a lot of reasons, I think we came up with the recommendations that we did. I think whether you can make those guns in Connecticut and be able to sell them in Connecticut is an interesting quandary. You know, that an individual who can be trusted to put them together, test fire them in a building, and can't be tested to own one is something worthy of consideration. And beyond that, we have people that come back from the military now. It's not World War II. It's Desert Storm, it's Afghanistan, it's in a number of different settings, and this is the gun they recognize. We may not like the way it looks, but it is the gun that they're comfortable using. And it's the same kind of a gun that people came back from other conflicts and other wars with. And so I think bans, especially, and I've suggested this to some people, the proposal that was done in New York, as I understand it, was that you had a certain date at which you had to relieve yourself from that gun. So imagine that you have 1 million guns now in the marketplace. 1 million guns where people that used to have them passed every requirement there was to own them, and now they've been relieved of them, one way or the other. Maybe they took them out of state and sold them. Maybe they turned them into the Department of Public Safety in New York, whatever it is. At some point, as states continue to do that, doesn't anybody see that there's going to be a lot of surplus gun hanging around the country? And I think we've taken great steps in the state of Connecticut and nationally to deal with illegal gun trafficking and illegal guns. Why would we want to add to that with even guns with more power? I just don't understand. But I do think that there are ways for us to restrict them and make people even more responsible for them. And I think that's what we try to do, is to kind of draw that distinction.
That's great.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you. Who's still here? Son of a gun.
Are you concerned at all that Senator Looney said that ultimately it's going to be the Speaker and the President that have to sign off on that bill? So I can foresee the scenario that maybe they will add something to this bill that will probably lose some votes, and it won't be a bipartisan approach. Is that your concern?
I think this is a very different situation. This isn't it. Maybe I'm naive, but I think this is a very different situation. I don't think that this is about adding a line item to a budget. I don't think it's about a very simple issue for any of us. And so I think numbers are going to be keenly important. And as this package gets moved one way or the other, I think one of the risks is that it does lose a lot of support. And so what may be important to some people, I personally still believe can be debated, can be discussed, can have a public hearing, and can still be passed. But it seems to me that we have an opportunity here to speak with one voice, and we ought to be able to do that with as much as we can and not all that we can.
So you have confidence that ultimately it could be a bipartisan package, even though Sharkey and Williams are the two that have to sign off on the final version?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because I do think it's a different situation. And I'm not convinced that everyone is wedded to the same list. I'm not. I mean, I am convinced that everyone is wedded to trying to do the best they can for the state of Connecticut. And so I remain optimistic that we're going to have an opportunity to get as many people as we can in the House and the Senate to vote for a package.
Do you agree that there are about 16 areas? Did you count them?
I think so. And I think there may actually be some similarities in some others, and to some degree it depends on what's in a word. So it seems to me that there may actually be some room for further discussion, and that was another reason why I thought adding some eyes to this conversation might be helpful. All right, thank you.